Hey divas, welcome to the channel. Tell me, how many times have you heard mockery thrown against the baby boomer generation, people calling them the most ignorant, unempathetic generation who likes to complain about the younger generations for being too soft because back in their day they had to trudge 12 miles to school during a fierce blizzard? And in turn, how many times have you heard complaints against Gen Z, calling them the most selfish, entitled generation who gets things too easy? Generation is just unsocial and much too addicted to technology. And so today we're going to be discussing a new trending topic on the internet, which is just more fuel added to the long-running hatred against Gen Z. And that is what is known as the Gen Z stare. The war against generations has been long-running, as each generation likes to pick apart the faults of the other generations, but Gen Z especially just gets a lot of hate since we were one of the first generations born into a world of complete technology, and we're blamed for making the world the way it is today. And so today I'm going to be talking about a new trending topic that has been being discussed on TikTok and X, which is what is known as the Gen Z stare, where older generations have been picking apart Gen Z's antisocial tendencies, particularly in a customer service setting, and describing how instead of meaningful or even just friendly interactions, they're met with blank stares and awkward silences. And of course, many service workers who are a part of Gen Z have been calling out the older generations for being stupid or rude when they are the customers in said scenario, detailing scenarios that supposedly warrant the alleged Gen Z stare. And I do just want to say that this video is not intended to spark hatred towards any of the generations. I think any and all generations has its faults. In my experience, I've had my fair share of people from all generations who suck as coworkers, as customers, and as employees at places I've been to. Of course, I believe there's always going to be people who fulfill a stereotype, that's why stereotypes exist. But Gen Z is a wide range of ages, and I don't think it's fair to just automatically assume that the generation is bad, especially when it's not our fault that we were thrown into a new and evolving world that was in part founded by the generations that came before us. Gen Z is also categorized as anyone born between 1997 and 2012, meaning the current age range for the generation is between 13 and 28. And so the people who were born on the earlier end of the generation were raised differently than the ones born on the second half of the generation. And I think for any generation, a large reason that they are the way they are is because of how they were raised. But I definitely still experienced a childhood with technology as I got a little bit older. You know, I had like a Kindle that I carried around, I had my pink DS, and like I constantly played on the Wii machine, but I still experienced the more simpler things like playing outside with toys and going outside to play with the neighbor kids. But I'll touch a little more on this a little bit later. Let's get to talking about the trend. Hatred against Gen Z is in no means a newfound thing. People have been talking about their hatred for Gen Z for a very long time. And it's been just a long running thing that Gen Z is just antisocial, entitled, addicted to technology, and far too sensitive, even though our sensitivities mostly just equal standing up for human rights and not turning a blind eye to things that were more normalized in the past, such as racism, sexism. I'm not entirely sure where this specific branch on the Gen Z hate tree sprouted from, but I do know that at a certain point people started discussing Gen Z as service workers and how they lack a lot of basic communication skills. And they started referencing the Gen Z stare, which is kind of this dead blank look in the workers' eyes when they're interacting with the customers that are coming into their establishment. As the Gen Z stare was being talked about, people a part of that generation, as I said, started clapping back with reasons behind the supposed stare, calling out the treatment that many service workers face. For example, the Gen Z stare is so rude, but you just asked me what the difference is between iced and hot. Or the Gen Z stare is so rude, you literally just yelled at me because you don't know how to use the chip on your card. Or, ma'am, you just called me a cunt because I told you we don't have a kitchen or sell microwaves. I work in a clothing store. Naturally, as those videos started circulating the internet and it became a trending topic, the videos posted by Gen Z were getting under the radar of older generations. And this sparked another fire as those older generations started insisting that Gen Z got the trend entirely wrong. One example of this comes from a commentary TikToker named Callie, who basically claimed, no, the trend isn't just referring to us giving this stare when we're dealing with stupid people, it's describing the way that we're we're not even greeted when you come in.
The Gen Z stare is not when somebody asks you a really stupid question and your natural instinct is to just give them a blank look back. That's not what anybody's talking about when we say the Gen Z stare. That has been a gag going back all the way through customer service. Like, you can go back and watch sitcoms from the 80s, and that's like a running gag on all of them. If anything, it's the customer service stare. No, when we say the Gen Z stare, what we mean is, for the example, a coffee shop. When we walk in, you will make eye contact with us and say nothing. And then we'll walk up to you, like, and stop in front of the register, and you will not say anything. We will then order, and you will just stand and stare at us. And then when we ask you a question for clarification, because you're not speaking, you then look at us like we've offended you.
I do sort of see the point and I get what people are saying because there is a difference between processing customers' stupidity, rudeness, and simply just like not even trying to interact with the customers. And obviously, I do think if you are getting paid to do a job, you should try to do the job to the best of your ability. And if that job description details being friendly to customers as they come into your establishment, obviously you should be able to do so. However, I do think that the way service workers are treated does at least somewhat play into the way that they behave when customers come into their establishments. After greeting several customers in a row and just being met with them barking out their orders, or having an old lady scream at you because you couldn't read their mind and know that they wanted jalapeno on their sandwich, yeah, sometimes it is hard to be enthusiastic and it's hard to have this sunny disposition that everyone expects you to have. A lot of this generation has also started working at these types of jobs relatively young, which, yes, I know the older generation worked young too. You got up at 4 a.m. for your paper routes. You can save the back in my day comments. But a lot of these jobs hire young, like McDonald's, you can start at like 14. These types of jobs have no problems exploiting the younger employees, no trouble overworking them. They'll be working long hours, dealing with difficult people, both that they're serving and, working alongside. And they'll make minimum wage, not even enough to successfully move out and start up their own life. Sometimes, no, you genuinely aren't getting paid enough to deal with the things that are thrown at you when you work these types of jobs. And if you have never worked one of these types of jobs, you can't even begin to understand some of the treatment that people are expected to deal with. Of course, there are much harder jobs out there, but those jobs also pay accordingly, so it makes the job more worth it. Of course, I'm not saying that that justifies just downright treating customers like trash for no reason, especially when they're being pleasant towards you and not being a problem. But I also just think that Gen Z is tired of being treated like a carpet for the other generations. And for the record, I also don't think that this is an exclusive Gen Z thing. I've seen service workers of any age treat customers this type of way, not seeming very enthusiastic, just being very straightforward with the ordering process. I've been to several places where I just pull up and it's like an older worker just being like, order, and kind of like just handing you the bag without any friendly interactions. And Gen Z has been the friendliest, most upbeat. I've also seen Gen Z kind of just be a little bit awkward. I've seen it go both ways, so I don't really think it's entirely fair to just place the blame solely on one generation and say that they're just the generation that doesn't know how to work or how to act around people. I feel like another factor that people oftentimes forget that plays into this is the fact that millennials and Gen X grew up in a different world. They grew up in a pre pandemic world where social interaction was entirely different. They also grew up in a world where technology wasn't as advanced as it was today. Of course, they had cellular phones and computers and such, but it wasn't the same. The first iPhone was invented in 2007. And so a lot of the Gen Z kids were growing up in this golden age of technology where like iPhones and iPads were first coming out and being more normalized. We were the first generation where iPads were used as a parenting tool, an easy distraction for any problem, and a replacement for real social interaction. And no, this isn't me bashing technology in general. I think screen time for kids is okay as long as there's a balance. It's okay for your kids to have a little screen time, and it's okay to rely on technology sometimes. And it's okay to be entertained by technology sometimes. But for a lot of this generation and the generations that are following us, technology has just been used as an easy fix. My child's crying, here's the iPad. Kid's bored, here's the iPad. Mommy's busy, here's the iPad. A lot of Gen Z and subsequently Gen X children were kind of locked into their iPads during times where they could have been learning more about social interaction. Instead of handling behavior when it arrives, a lot of parents use technology to keep their kids' behavior at bay when they're going through the grocery store or sitting at a table at a restaurant. They'd say, here, this is so you don't get bored and act up. Here's the iPad to play with, or here's my phone to look through. And so, therefore, a lot of the generation just kind of missed the mark on how to interact socially and how to behave. Obviously, if you're not seeing and learning how other people react in social situations, you're going to struggle learning how to act in certain social situations. Or instead of, hey, go outside and see if the neighbor kid wants to play, it's kind of like, oh, here's the iPad you can play on for a little bit. And I know some of that is due to the world we live in. Obviously, it's not as safe to just be like, hey, sweetie, go walk up and down the block and see if there's any kids who want to play. We live in a more dangerous world, and I get that. But I do think that technology has caused a genuine disconnect in the world and the way that social interaction is handled. And this, once again, is not me being a technology hater. I think it's okay in certain situations, and I think kids can use technology. I mean, it's literally like implemented in schools and such. I think it's just about a balance of how to use it. See, I love technology. I love that it can help me connect with my friends who live far away, and I love how it can provide me entertainment at times. But there is no denying the disconnect that technology has caused between people. I think the pandemic in 2020 also changed social interaction for everyone, for any generation. Social etiquette has just been lost for many, many people after they, literally couldn't socialize or weren't supposed to socialize for a while. Many people tend to still act as if they're the only ones out in public sometimes, like when they're walking through a grocery store and just leaving their cart wherever they feel like, or just talking very loudly on phones. Certain behaviors like that, things that were more normalized, obviously when you're in your own house during the pandemic, people tend to forget that we now live in a world where we're interacting with people. And a lot of people who were in school during the pandemic and forced to obviously like learn virtually from their houses, or socially distance themselves from their classmates are now the same teenagers and young adults who are entering the working world and working those types of jobs that people like to bash them at. The world had a genuine shift in the way that we interact with each other, and I don't think it's fair to entirely blame a generation for, losing some of that lack of connection. We also do live in a world where we're starting to see more disabilities like autism and ADHD. We're starting to recognize those traits, and instead of just automatically assuming that those people are stupid or incapable, they actually can do more than people used to give them credit for, but it does influence the way that they're acting. Like, just because I'm not making eye contact with you doesn't mean that I'm not capable of taking your order. And a lot of people tend to forget that they were brought up in a world where those people weren't even treated like they could get jobs. These people were just, brushed aside and marked as stupid or incapable and infantilized to the point where they couldn't do these things. And like the people hiring were much different. So, of course, the trend kind of veered into Gen Z's just misunderstanding the trend and mistaking the customer service stare for the Gen Z stare. Somehow, the blame game still wasn't over, though. I posted my own video about it, essentially saying what I'm saying in this video, but in shortened terms. And at that point, that's when I started to notice that myself and anyone who posted a video on the topic was met with a lot of backlash from the older generation. now saying that we completely misunderstood the trend again, this time saying, well, we weren't even talking about you guys as workers, we're talking about you guys when you come in as customers. You're terrible customers. And they all started claiming that we're just trying to spin the trend to our advantage to make ourselves sound better and to blame somebody else. Which I don't get. Every video I and many other people saw was directly talking about Gen Z as workers and how they don't greet people anymore. And then suddenly we start having our opinion about it, and now it's no, it's you guys as customers. I honestly think that internet trends are just one big game of telephone, and it's easy for like one small difference to change the way that someone else views the trend. So maybe the trend really did start out as someone ranting about a Gen Z person as a customer, and then, someone interpreted it a different way and it flipped and it became this whole topic of Gen Z as workers. But the end result was always just going to be finding a way to hate Gen Z. One video I saw talking about this, I think, described it pretty well, so I'm going to show that.
Oh my god, we're not talking about Gen Z cashiers, we're talking about Gen Z customers.
Y'all move the goalposts every time we start interacting with a trend that y'all started. Every fucking time.
We're not talking about the customer service, we're talking about y'all being customers, you're rude customers.
Every single video I saw for the first week and a half of this trend was talking about Gen Z customer service. Not customers, customer service. My generation. What we do as a job. How we work. Yeah, that. And then as soon as Gen Z customer service workers started being like, we give you that look because you're stupid, you went, no, that's not what it's about. If you're getting stared at by a Gen Z in public, it's because you did something to deserve it. You said something dumb. You asked a stupid question. Or you interrupted a conversation. Like, I'm sorry, but if a waitress walks up to me when I'm in the middle of saying something to my husband, I'm probably gonna look at her like, I'm in the middle of a fucking sentence, you stupid cunt. Wait a minute. I'm sorry, but if I'm having a conversation with someone and some employee interrupts, yeah, I'm gonna look at you like you're a fucking idiot. And if I'm at work and some customer asks some stupid ass question like, can I use my credit card for lottery? When we have signs everywhere that say it's cash only, yeah, I'm gonna look at you like you're a fucking idiot. We developed this look because we don't put up with stupidity.
Genuinely, I just think a lot of people couldn't handle the way that they were called out for the way that they treat the younger generations and the way that they treat service workers. And so now they're spinning the trend around so they can blame the sensitive Gen Z people. And once again, no worker should blatantly be rude. Customers should interact and be polite with the workers. It's everybody's problem. But I feel as though any and all generations have people who don't know how to communicate. Any and all generations have rude people. Like I get so many older people who I'll ask them, they're like, hi, how are you today? Billy. Or I'll get people who, just don't answer my questions. I'll get a lot of older people who will come in on their phones and they'll still come up to my line to order. And then when I say, hi, what can I get for you today? They'll be like, I'm on the phone. Or if I don't say anything because they're on the phone, they'll just stare at me. Yes, some Gen Z people don't know how to order at a restaurant. Some Gen X people don't know how to order at a restaurant. Some millennials don't know how to order at a restaurant. Some baby boomers don't know how to order at a restaurant. We need to stop blaming this social issue that any generation can have on Gen Z. And I think we need to stop bullying teenagers and young adults for being brought up in this world full of technology through a global pandemic that stopped the way that, curbed the way that changed the way we talk to people. I think we all just need to realize that we live in a different world, for better or for worse. The world is changing and it's not going to stay exactly the same forever. The way things were when you were young aren't going to be the way that things are forever. And there's always going to be issues with somebody, and we need to stop playing the blame game and just sort out the issues. Where's the blame game getting us? All we're doing is, creating this hate when there's social issues that any generation can and does have. Yes, some people from my generation suck. They're entitled. They're annoying. They don't know how to communicate. But maybe the call is coming inside the house. So that is going to be all for this video. That's just my opinion on things. Of course, I know there's still going to be people bashing me, somehow saying that I'm misinterpreting once again. But that is going to be all for this video, and I'll see y'all in my next.